Well, hi everybody. I'm Beatty Code Meadows, and welcome again, my friends, to the Ask Beatty Show. With all of the depressing news that we read about and that we hear about, one of the things that is most disconcerting to me as a psychotherapist and a sex therapist is that I hear people more and more giving up on love. Now, whether or not you want to be married is really not the issue, but I hear more and more people saying, there are no good men anymore. There are no good women. And what is going on with us, with our hopes, with our expectations, with our dreams? And all I can tell you is that there are plenty of good men around, and there are many, many wonderful, wonderful women who like you, who like me, are wanting connection and wanting love. And we have to be very, very careful to not get caught up in this depressing situation. Yes, there's depressing things going on politically, and I know economically people are scared, people are losing their jobs. We're in a very, very uncertain time. And yet, it's still possible. It's still possible to connect, to meet, to fall in love, to get married if that's what you choose to do. And I think that we have to not lose sight of the fact that your dreams can come true. Now, naturally, we have to look at the reality of what is going on in the world of relationships. And this scares a lot of people. And the statistics happen to be, very frightening. We're seeing changes in the age when people are wanting to get married, if they're wanting to get married at all. We're looking at a divorce rate, of course, for first marriages, 48%. For second marriages, 67%. Unfortunately, couples marrying for the second time are finding themselves in a divorce court at a rate of 67%. And for third marriages, and I know these are dismal statistics, and yet I want to assure you that there are happy couples, and I'm sure that hopefully some, if not many, people who are doing well in their relationships and where they are flourishing, if in fact that is what you choose to do as far as having a relationship. And again, we know the divorce rate for third marriages happens to be 71, 72%. And of course, if you listen to the Ask Beatty Show, this is the 13th year that I've been hosting the Ask Beatty Show here on the Progressive Radio Network. The domestic violence statistics numbers are continuing to go up. I mean, we're still talking about 3 women being killed every single day by their so-called intimate partner. But the good news is that people have some things actually that they need to learn and that they need to do so that they will be able to find and maintain healthy relationships. And I was, talking to a television producer a couple of days ago, and I was saying that unfortunately, these 3 things that people actually need to learn and do are things that we are reluctant to do. I think that we would just like to madly fall in love, see somebody across the room, and that all will be well and that we will have our happily ever after. But the 3 things, number one, as you've heard me say many, many times, we each have to be in a good place ourselves, emotionally and psychologically and psychiatrically. We need to have been willing and be willing to work through our unfinished business, usually beginning with our own family of origin, our skeletons in the closet, our depression, our anxiety, our early child sexual abuse, our domestic violence experiences. And we're able to do this. We don't need to do this alone. This is hard, hard work, which is why, I hope I've been able to convince you really over the years that sometimes the very, very best thing that we can do is reach out and get some good professional help. So again, if you're looking for love, if you happen to be looking for marriage, if you're looking for a relationship, this is the first thing that we have to do. It's not sexy, it's not fun, but we need to get ourselves into a good place so that the relationship is going to be the icing on the cake, and we need to be the cake. And trust me, if there was a shortcut that we did not need to do this and that we could just somehow be able to fall in love and have a happily ever after relationship, I would have figured this out a long, long, long time ago. So that if you are looking for love, or even if you're not looking for love, and if you're struggling, the real question is, are you willing? Are you willing, my friends, to acknowledge and address and resolve as best as we can, even though we cannot change our history, the things that are getting in the way of your life and your relationships and your potential love life. And if you happen to be in a relationship, these things might also be getting in the way of your relationship. Number two, we need clarity. We need real, real clarity about the ingredients that actually go into a successful relationship. If we're buying a car, if we're buying a cell phone, if we're buying anything, most of us, we do a lot of research to make sure that whatever it is that we are going to be purchasing, that we know what it is, we know the pros and the cons. We've read reviews, we go to Wirecutter, perhaps in the New York Times, so that we are very, very well prepared. And yet, this is not something that most people typically do at all when it comes to our relationships. And number three, and for me, this is not about selling books. The research that I did with 450 people in the Boston, Providence, and Connecticut area, my book came out in 2000, the book For Better, For Worse, Forever. Discover the Path to Lasting Love teaches us exactly how to assess. Yes, assess, evaluate. It is not sexy, it is not romantic, but how to assess who's right for you and who's wrong for you before committing to any serious relationship. And what's so interesting, for me is that I have this wonderful evidence-based news that I have been trying to share, that I've actually been sharing, for at least, 25 years. And yet every week here on the Ask Beatty show, and as you know, I'm the advice columnist for Dan's papers in the Hamptons, in New York City, and Palm Beach. The statistics are not changing, and the statistics are not changing. And this is not about blame, and it is not about judgment, but the statistics are not changing because people are not doing these three things when it comes to our relationships. And we need to take some responsibility. And if we take this personal responsibility, we still then have a wonderful, wonderful opportunity in our lives. And I say, regardless of your age and stage in life, to find a relationship, to find love, if that's in fact something that you want, and to find marriage. Again, that is not necessarily what everybody is looking for in life, and that's fine too. But I hope that you're not giving up. Now, there's some preparation work that you may have to do. But again, love and connection and marriage, and just that feeling of finding someone who you would like to, or you would hope to share your love with. I think that in all the studies, when you look at the happiest countries in the world, the happiest people in the world, what are they doing? What is actually going on? And the study results, they are consistent. In fact, I was looking at the happiest countries in the world, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Sweden, the Netherlands, and what do they do? And I think we have to look at countries and peoples that are doing well, people that and countries that are thriving. they look beyond the money, the increasing one's wealth. Instead, they focus on providing citizens with universal health care. They prioritize mental health, which is something we continue to need to do a much, much, much better job in this country. They encourage generosity and trust and a healthy work-life balance and strong social networks and communities. And in the final analysis, it really is about love and connection and community and goodness and generosity of spirit. And if you're finding that it is difficult for you, then again, we don't need to navigate life's ups and downs on our own. And I see people every single day in my private practice here in New York City and in East Hampton, who find themselves stuck. They meditate, they may eat well, they may exercise, and yet there is unfinished business. There are skeletons in their closet that continue to get in the way. And I am so impressed with people who have the courage, because it takes a lot of courage to acknowledge, hey, I'm not doing well. And it takes even more courage to be willing to say to ourselves, I need to do something about it. And not only do I need to do something about it, but I will do something about it. And in looking at the happiest people and the happiest countries in the world, just to go over some of the things that they do. They have a Mediterranean diet. They make time for regular exercise, including weight training and yoga and meditation. They socialize regularly. Again, in all the literature, that's the thing that comes up the most. The connection and the socialization. They sleep a minimum of 8 hours a night. They turn off their electronic devices. I mean, people are up morning, noon, and night on their phones, on their devices, believing, in fact, that there is connection. And it's certainly not the kind of connection that is bringing a lot of happiness to people. People will say, well, I have 1,000 likes or I have 1 million followers. It's the quality of the connections. It's the quality of the interactions. And one of the things that has been really, really frustrating for me is that since the pandemic, basically none of my patients want to come in to see me in person for therapy. And let me say that, we do the very best that we can do on a Zoom, but it is not the same. And if you are in therapy, or if you are planning to be in therapy, this is a really important conversation that you should have with your therapist or with your potential therapist, that you want to come in. It is a different kind of interaction that I have with patients when they're sitting here in my office here in New York City and East Hampton than when we are communicating on Zoom. I mean, people do the best that they can do, but that's not fool ourselves. Let us not fool ourselves. And there was a piece in the New York Times a couple of days ago where some of the younger people are getting a little tired of the online dating apps. I mean, this is all you hear. This is all you read in the New York Times, how people met. Some of them, of course, met in college or in graduate school. But more and more and more, I feel that we are becoming less social in person, when I'm talking about socialization. And it is a mistake, and it is costing us. And we are looking at depression statistics. We are looking at anxiety statistics that are rising. We are looking at suicide statistics and suicide ideation statistics. And I think a good part of this has to do with isolation. In fact, our former Surgeon General was talking about a loneliness epidemic in this country. So if you are feeling lonely, if you are feeling disconnected, The question becomes, what are you planning to do today? Or what are you planning to do tomorrow to put yourself out there? A patient of mine who had been talking for a very, very long time about the importance of working out. So she talked and she talked, and finally she decided that she was going to get a gym membership. And I'm very proud of her. She did. And I was saying to her, I said, this is going to be an absolutely fantastic way, for you to interact with people. So she came back after the first couple of workout sessions and she said, Beatty, she says, that's just not the way it works anymore. She says, people at the gym are all plugged in so that you can hardly, it's impossible. It's actually becomes impossible to interact, to say hello, to find out, what this person is working on, because people are connected to their devices rather than trying to connect with other human beings who may be a foot or 2 feet away from them. So if we're going to take in all of the research knowledge, and the research is clear, these are not just my feelings, the research is very, very clear. We need to put down our devices. I'm not talking about throwing them away. Although, frankly, there are times that I wish that I had the courage to just throw away my cell phone and just let it go, and maybe check in with my email messages a couple of times a day. I think it's become very, very addictive. And it's almost, when you think about it, it's almost like wearing a sign. If you're out in the street, and when I walk down the streets of New York City, I have to be careful because people are plugged in. They are looking on at their phones, and it's very easy to potentially really bump into to someone. So what is the message? When you think about it, what is the message that we are giving to others when we are continually plugged in on the streets, in restaurants, at the gyms? What we are really saying is stay away from me. Don't come near me. And yet it is the exact opposite of what most people are really wanting and craving. So we have to be very aware of what is it? What exactly is it that we are projecting to the world? And whether you're in line at a grocery store or at a bank, even though people these days, I think, are banking online and probably ordering more and more things, including, groceries, on the computer. Let's just think about, what it is that we really want, what it is that is really important. And I think that if you're really honest with yourself, the majority of people are not going to say, I really just want to be alone. I mean, there are times, of course, that we do want to be alone, but I think more and more and more we're seeing greater numbers of people who are feeling more and more and more isolated. So I hope this is an inspirational, message to you to, to get out and to take better care of yourself and to think about really doing the things that are really in, whether or not we're talking about what you're eating, whether or not you're on your devices too much, so that you are more or less in touch with what you are doing throughout your days. And it's something that can be extremely valuable, and it's also something that you may be surprised to discover. For example, how many times you're looking at your phone, or how many times or how many hours during the course of a day that you are on your computers. I mean, people are surprised. The research is telling us that with some of the adolescent studies, that the kids are spending 9 hours a day on their various different devices. And I remember telling a student this, who was very, very surprised. And I asked her to monitor how many hours a day she was actually on her devices. And she came back and she says, well, it was not 9 hours, but it was pretty close to 9 hours. So we have to be cognizant, we have to be honest in terms of how we are really doing. So if we're looking at our mental health as an example, what is it that may be interfering with your feeling really good most days? I mean, nobody's feeling perfectly, most days. Enjoy your life. The same goes for your relationships. I think it is important. And I ask you, of course, to do this every single week, which for some of you, it may be over the top, but I think it's really important to just evaluate your relationships, and hopefully things are going well. But we have to be honest with ourselves. And if there are certain relationships that are off and that are not working, it's not about ignoring or denying. If the relationships are important, we need to then sit down with the people or the person and say, look, things seem to be a little off. Can we talk about it rather than pretend that things are okay enough? Because if we deny and we avoid dealing with our issues, trust me, sooner or later there is going to be a major explosion of some kind. And this is what I see, far too often in my practice, where individuals and couples and families wait way, way, way too long before dealing, before acknowledging, before communicating, before problem solving about the different issues that are really not working. And it's easy, I think, initially to just look the other way. But sooner or later, all of this really does catch up with us. So hopefully your relationships are going well. And if they are not, I hope that I have convinced you and encouraged you to pick up the phone, send an email, ask to meet someone in person to discuss the quality of the relationship, and to discuss what is and what is not working, with the goal being to resolve the problems that are getting in the way of you and your family, you and your partner, you and your children being able to really enjoy each other. Other things to look about in your life, substance abuse. You need to make sure that you are, on track, that you're not drinking too much. And of course, there are more and more articles that I've been reading on even, a little bit of alcohol and the real serious physical, forget the emotional, forget the psychological, forget the relational, but the physical consequences to our bodies for people who are consuming even a very, very small amount of, of alcohol. So, again, it's about being honest. It's about being introspective, and not just complaining, and not just bemoaning, and not just giving up, but being really ready to step up to the plate and deal with things that are not really working in your life. And, as a reminder, as I remind you all the time, we don't need to do this on our own. Well, there was a very, very, very interesting article in the New York Times that I wanted to discuss with you. And I'm very fortunate to have my husband, Jim Bredos, who is a sociologist and a criminologist, and who is the host of the Radical Imagination on MNN, and he has a television show, LTV, in the Hamptons. And it's really important to get the sociological perspective on this. So this was the article, this was the headline, and welcome, Jim. I'm pretty happy that you're here. Welcome. Okay, the headline, there's a link between therapy, culture, and childlessness. And I just want to read you a couple of lines, and then we can start to talk about this. There are few decisions more fraught for members of my generation. This girl, Michael Leibowitz, she is in her 20s, the cusp of millennial and Gen Z, than whether or not to become a parent. In 2023, the United States fertility rate fell to a record low. Some of the decline can be explained by a delay in having children, delay in marriage, or a decrease in the number of children, rather than people simply forgoing childbearing entirely, but it still seems increasingly likely that millennials will have the highest rate of childlessness of any generational cohort in American history. So Jim, what do you make of all of this? Didn't we grow up, you and me, in a generation where it was love, it was marriage, it was not cohabitation, it was children, it was family? So what do you think has changed, and what do you think about this new phenomenon that is really occurring where more and more people. In fact, my physiotherapist this morning and his wife, and they're in their 30s, were saying, no, we don't want to have children. They're swearing off parenthood. What are your thoughts about all of this?
Well, my generational experience, we are the same generation, is somewhat different than yours, of course. One, of course, we grew up in different cultures, for one. I don't know how new this phenomenon is. This has been uh, a pattern of people having less numbers of children or not having children at all in many of the European countries where the population has become older and older uh, and more well-to-do actually as well. So I don't know how new this is. I think there's a lot to unpack here. We've got to break down to some of the specific things you'd like to talk about. But for one thing, childhood is the concept of childhood is a rather new phenomenon. And of course, our generation, one after World War II, was perhaps one of the very first in which people, again, had that suburban dream, although you lived it more than I did, and raising the kids and growing up and Father Knows Best and so on and so on.
That was it. That was Jim. I mean, that was really,
Your
that
experience,
was a, that was certainly a given in my,
right?
Canadian Orthodox, Jewish world. But today, for example,
Yeah.
these are some of the explanations. This is in the article. Uh, they're not having kids because it's too expensive. They're not having kids because they can't find the right partner. Of course, we hear that all the time. They're not having kids because they want to prioritize their careers because of climate change, because the idea of bringing a child into this broken planet is
Mhm.
too depressing. They're swearing off parenthood because of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, or because they're perennially commitment phobic, or more popular culture has made motherhood seem so daunting. Well, motherhood is not easy. It's to
Parenthood.
talk as a mother. Parenthood, it's certainly challenging. But the point that I wanted to discuss really with you is in this article. Michael Leibovich, he says there's another reason that's often been overlooked. And over the past few decades, Americans have redefined harm, abuse, neglect, and trauma, expanding those categories to include emotional and relational struggles that were previously considered unavoidable parts of life. And adult children, and I hear this all the time, seem increasingly likely to publicly, even righteously, cut off contact with a parent, sometimes citing emotional, physical, or sexual abuse they experienced in childhood, and sometimes things like clashing values, parental toxicity, or feeling misunderstood or unsupported. So, in a nutshell, blaming, obviously, there are situations where there's been abuse, where the situations are so dysfunctional and so awful that there needs to be a cutoff. But I'm hearing more and more, and in this article too, of adult children blaming their parents for this imperfect childhood, which of course perfection doesn't exist, as a rationale for not wanting to have children.
Okay, well, to start with, I believe the author of this article is about 29 and comes from an Orthodox Jewish background.
Right.
And I don't think, I know that the great majority of people do not go to therapy, have not gone to the sort of extensive therapy that she's been describing here. She said that she started at 14. And I think, again, this is not something that is all so new. We've known for a long time, you have to be a Freudian, that early childhood experiences are very central to what we become as adults and so on. And one thing I'd like to add here before we go even further is the sociological emphasis here. It does not rule out the psychological or therapeutic. In fact, I think it accentuates it, or there should be a combination of ways of looking at this. And I point to C. Wright Mills, one of my favorite sociologists, who said we need to very, very much realize that our so-called individual or personal troubles are very much intertwined with larger political, or if you will, or social issues. So, yes, during the Great Depression, through most of human history, having children was a vehicle, especially if you were living in the farms or rural areas, to help you, um, uh, survive. Poor people had a lot of kids because they knew there was no real government or help that was going to be forthcoming except for their own kids helping them, hopefully, in old age. So all of this is rather new, and we are part of that generation. Now, going to therapy, that generation, the 50s and 60s and onward, and so on, there was a stress, and there was a beginning focus on early parenting or early childhood experiences, and one did come to examine and analyze what was that experience. I don't think that you can then say that that in and of itself causes this generation to have severe questions about whether or not they're going to have children. It may be one of the variables, but I don't think it's necessarily even the most important one.
Well, even in this, I agree with you, and I think that even in this article, in one of the paragraphs, she says, they mess you up. Now, I'm sorry that this young woman at 14,
What messes you up?
children, having
Oh, I
have
see.
having children, and well, I think she was talking about her parenting experience, and I'm sorry that at age 14, she had an eating disorder, and there were, some serious problems
Right,
in her family. She says that she was an emotional, moody, teenager,
right.
and okay. But I think that one of the things that is so important is that we stop blaming our history. There are people who've gone through incredibly traumatic
Mhm.
situations in their lives. And is it not the job of the adult to, as best as we can, emotionally try and work through what did and didn't happen in our lives, with our families, with our colleagues, with our friends, so that we're then able to better live in the moment without continuing to live in the past and have one foot in the past and one foot in the present.
Now, I'm assuming you're talking about people who go to therapy at this point in terms of helping. We all need to come to grips with ourselves and try to make what we can of our lives. But are you referring mainly to the therapists or the therapeutic process that many people in this generation have gone to? So what you're saying are the role of the therapist in getting us to, uh, you know, certainly come to grips with what has happened to us, but not necessarily blame it all on the parents. Is that what you're sort of saying?
I think that, good therapy involves a
Right,
lot of probing.
right,
And yes, it's important to go back and try and help the patient, the client understand what didn't happen in their lives. But it's far too easy. And many, many researchers and therapists are saying the same thing. It seems that we are really in this blaming game thing with our parents right now. I mean, the levels of estrangement, we haven't seen these kinds of statistics where adult children are simply cutting off their parents. And it seems that more and more and more, people are referring to childhood trauma. Now, there's real trauma. And of course, everybody has their own definition, of what trauma is. But, what I've found over the years is that the majority of parents, they really try to do their very, very, very best In fact, there has been more books written and more focusing on hands-on parenting than ever before. I mean, for example, working mothers, they spend as much time focused on their children as stay-at-home mothers. They were involved in
I
all
don't see how that's
things.
possible, quite frankly. I question, I mean, how can that be? If they're out there working and
Focused,
focused,
not necessarily the
qualitative,
exact
it's
number
interesting.
of hours and minutes, but there has been such emphasis on quality parenting. And I think that most parents do their very best. And I think that if this generation, if they have questions about whether or not they want to be parents, I mean, those are important questions that they actually need to be asking themselves. It's just far too easy to be blaming their childhoods and their parents as the primary reason why they are choosing not to have kids. If they don't want to have kids, it's fine. But it just sounds, Jim, that there's more and more and more parental blame that is going around and being expressed.
Well, I think you have to also look at why there is such emphasis on parenting and what constitutes that and what are adults bringing or not bringing to that relationship. What are some of the parental needs here that are involved? And so it's not one-sided or not here. Yeah, I think it's a complex sort of issue here, and especially when, and again, this is nothing necessarily new at all. We certainly did in my generation in the 60s, look to our adults and saw them severely lacking in many, many ways, morally, economically, politically. So when we look at adults today, what do we see? What do we see? We see a society that is reeling toward uh, fascist dictatorship. There's no question about it. There is a militarization. We see it in the headlines. The National Guard is out there taking on the role that traditionally has been for the state, and so on. So we see very little adults in the room. And those who are supposedly still there can't stand up and with integrity um, say something about all of this. Many can't. And so this generation looks around them and says, hey, what the heck is going on here? What sort of world am I expected to become part of? What sort of role models do I have here? And when you look at a Musk and a Trump going about like a bunch of couple of 7-year-olds, privileged, just
So people are rightly,
yeah. I think young people
people
are
are
rightfully.
rightly concerned. I have a 24-year-old male patient that I'm treating right now, and he's having some issues finding work. He didn't finish school. He dropped out of college. And he said to me, he said, I always dreamed of having a wife. He 24 and
Mhm.
he's still dreaming of having a wife and a family, and didn't think that that was going to be possible because of the financial constraints and maybe political constraints, as well, in terms of the thought of bringing a child into,
You
uh,
still, yeah,
which is a crazy
I
world.
just wondered, you said still at 24. That's still a very young age to think
He
of
hasn't given
having a
up.
child. Oh, why? Yeah, I
He
mean,
hasn't given up. He's at 24. That was his dream when he was a younger boy, to have a
uh-huh.
wife and to have children and to have a house. And he was
Yeah.
saying he didn't think, especially if he stays in New York, that he was ever going to be able to have a house, leave alone being
Well,
able to afford raising children.
I find that a little, well, it's an interesting way of putting it. A young man often is in a sense trying to find themselves, a young woman as well, I should say, too, as well.
Right?
And this takes time, and this is a period of growing and experimenting and living and traveling and so on and so on. I'm not so sure that so many 19, 20, 21-year-olds are dreaming oh my goodness, so I can't wait to get
He
married and start
dreamt
okay, well, fine.
he dreamt of it. Now he's not going to be doing this,
Right.
but what the point was, Jim,
Yeah.
that he didn't even believe up the road that it was going to be possible for him because of, in his situation, financial constraints, to be able to buy a house and have a family. And kind of getting back to this article,
Right.
um, you know, when she talks about, just the parents who mess you up, and perhaps she is also inferring that, she believes that if she in her generation were to have children, that maybe the worry would be that they would mess up their children.
Well,
This is a very sad commentary on this generation.
well, it's a combination of the generation, but
It
maybe
is.
about the therapists or the therapeutic process, which is leading her to believe that. Because as I've been through the process myself, and I certainly had issues with my family, as just about everybody does. But I was brought to believe that through an understanding of what happened, what they pressures they were under, to to my relationship with my parents and grandparents and so on improved, particularly with my father, dramatically, and my mother for that matter, in the therapeutic process. So, I was fortunate. I think that good therapy does that. It's fair. It brings out, yeah, wow, this did happen to you, and
It
this
brings
was
out
tough,
other
and so
people,
on.
it brings out other
We got to,
people's perspectives, even though if those other people are not present in
yeah,
the
absolutely.
therapeutic process, at least to have the clients, the patients, entertain what it must have been like
I
for
agree.
their parents juggling jobs and financial concerns and
Agree.
perhaps marital concerns and the difficulties of raising, a child, leave alone two or
I
three
agree.
children. That there's a kind of empathy and understanding that
Yes.
needs to be brought into the therapeutic process rather than the blame game. Well, that's just cut off your parents.
Sure, I agree with that, and I think it has to be done in all kinds of ways in our education system, in our media, in our movies, and so on. And I don't think it's done very well at all. I agree with you. I think there's a larger issue, isn't there, Beatty? What is the role of having children today in today's world besides,
What do you mean the role? What is the
well,
role?
why have kids? Why have kids? What is it that uh, the would-be mother and father are thinking about when they are now saying, "Hey, let's let's have a family here." What does that mean, and what should it mean? And is it better? I think one of the letters to the editor in response to this article pointed out, well, you know, people should really think about this very carefully, and there's some people that would be perfectly happy and better off not having any
That's
children,
fine.
and so on and so on. Right.
But that's fine. I mean, this is not about, and this conversation, and I hope my listeners understand this. This is not about a conversation to convince anybody of anything.
Mhm.
What this conversation is about is for people to consider the pros and cons for each individual and couple and family, of having children, of not having children, of marrying or not marrying, of having a sex life, of not having a sex life, of going to therapy, of not going to therapy. I mean, this is what good therapy needs to be about, where various different options are looked at, and then the person individually then is going to figure out in going through this process what in fact is really in my best interest.
Totally, totally agreed.
Right.
But you started this segment with this taking us back to the generation after World War II
Yes.
and the culture that really wasn't questioning any of this. This is a given.
Right.
Okay?
It's a given.
This was
Yes.
you move to the suburbs, have
Right.
the two
Right.
kids,
Right.
picket fence, and so on. So
Right.
then,
Right.
and some of it comes from people who believe this is biblical in a sense.
People still believe that, don't you
Well, I
think?
don't know about that, but I mean, Look, as I think some of your listeners heard me here before, I taught over 12 actually wonderful years at yeshiva. I enjoyed it enormously. And one thing that really
At
all
Yeshiva University
Yeshiva
in New
University here
York.
in New York, right,
Yes.
as a criminal justice person and criminologist, sociologist, but I enjoyed it. It was fascinating because that background was not part of my secular Jewish background, but it was very endearing and very interesting for me to realize that these young men, I was teaching the men there, uh, couldn't wait, the great majority of them, to graduate, and it was an absolute given. It
Right.
seemed like the day after graduation,
Right.
it was engagement time,
But that
and
was the
then it was
value.
marriage time.
That was the value.
That was the
That
value,
was the
right?
value.
And I think
Yes.
you find that also with other groups that take, I mean, the Jewish tradition, culture has played a tremendous emphasis on family as a way of surviving and so on, the traditions.
Well,
And
so does the Christian
well, yeah, for different reasons,
church.
but be fruitful and multiply. I don't know how many more people we need in this earth
But
right
that
now.
that's but that's your that is
Well,
your feeling. That
well,
is that may work
I
for
think
you.
ecologically
No,
sustaining. Okay, well,
well, I
let's
think
go on.
that people who are, thinking about having children are probably not thinking about how many more people, we should have in this world.
Oh, I think they
It's a
are.
person, I think they
Yeah.
mostly don't think, about that at all. They think about
But they're
the
not
idea.
taking for granted the narrative that I think you grew up, particularly in Canada in the 50s, correct? And then the turmoil of the 60s, including the feminist movement, which said, "Hey, we're just not women are just not surrogates here, or followers of whatever our husbands are doing. We need to have a life. We need to figure out, well,
It's
yeah,
a
what role?
juggle.
It's a
It's
right.
it's it's
Okay,
a juggle, and
fair
I
enough.
often say that I, had plenty of challenges just having one child
Mhm.
and lots of support and lots of help, and yet, the reality, and any mother, any parent, will tell you that if you're juggling, a job and financial concerns and just trying to give your child or children the best possible life that you can. It costs a lot of money, the tremendous amount of time and energy. And I think that most parents, that's the point. They go into this with the best of intention. We
Well,
do our very best. Is it perfect? No, but we
let
do our best.
let me push back a little bit on that. I don't think you need a lot of money to try to go put your kid to see every concert or Broadway play or send them to Europe and all this and
It's
this.
very expensive, Jim, to have a
Well,
child. It's very, very
I'm
costly.
not saying that it isn't. I'm not saying that it isn't. But I know as a kid who came from very modest
Different
background.
times,
Well, wait a minute
different
now, just a
times,
minute. I
different
had
times.
the best possible education in the New York City public schools. I came from an artistic family that provided me with trips to the museum, and my grandfather used to take me there, and we used to talk about the art. We used to talk about his experiences as an art student. My mother played the piano. I learned to play the piano.
You were lucky.
Well, I'm
You
just saying.
you were lucky. You had your grandparents. Your parents were lucky that they had that kind of
The
support.
only point I really want to make here, it's a very simple point. I think whatever our backgrounds, whatever our experiences, whatever our traditions, and so on, the key thing is if you're going to have kids, really be able to give them the love and nurturing that all that you can possibly do.
Well, and
And
if you're,
and,
I agree. And
and
if
that's it.
you're going to, and if you are going to
And let
have
the chips
kids,
fall where it may, and absolutely prepare them as best you can. But the key point is to give them life. You've given them life. You give them a warmth and a nurturing and a love of life and an appreciation of life, and that's the best we can do.
that is the best we can do. And that's one of the letters to the editor was written by a Freudian psychoanalyst. And, she was saying that, that in order to be able to really do this and to do this well, she still feels that a growing number of millennials have decided not to have children for various reasons, including unrealistic standards of parenting.
Yeah.
My own clinical work has taught me, she says, that despite parental trauma, people can learn how to be good enough parents
I
and
agree.
good enough, not perfect, not wonderful every minute of the day,
And we've
and
had
raise.
Sabrina Geffner on who read that documentary, Good Enough. She was a good enough child too. It works both ways. That parents shouldn't put this incredible pressure on kids. Oh my goodness, 3 years old, they only know French and Italian and German. And oh,
Yeah,
what about this? What
yeah.
about that? They need to go to this and they no.
I think the bottom
Get off
line,
their case.
I
Let
think
them be.
I think the bottom line is that, this generation,
Yeah.
and I think that they're asking the right questions. So
Mhm.
I think that when, we were growing up and that it was a given that you get married, you fall in love, hopefully you get married and you have a family, that was really the way it was. And I
Have
think
to be.
and had right and had to be. And I think it's really positive that people are questioning what in the past were the have to be's, whether or not they want to get married, whether or not they want to have children. And this is where it takes a lot of introspection. And it takes a lot of really knowing yourself, what I want and need. And of course, at different ages and stages, I mean, all of this
Yeah.
changes, what I want and need, what I don't want and need, describe the reality of where I am at this moment in time, which is going to be different today than maybe it's going to be in 5 years from now, so that we're not just reacting, that we're taking things, especially like marriage and relationships and parenting, that we're taking it seriously and that we're giving this a lot of thought.
Mhm.
And
And having some fun along the way and trying to find,
finally,
and keep in mind, guess what? You know this. You, your parents had you in their 30s, and so did mine.
20s, in their
Well,
40s,
mine was in
in
mid
their
30s, I guess.
in
Okay.
their
So your
40s.
24-year-old patient, relax a bit. There's always the 30s, the 29-year-old who wrote this article. Hey, keep at it. You'll see what you feel like. There's still time. There's plenty of time.
Well, I think that, one of the things that's particularly hard right now, and when you were, making your opening comments, Jim, is that this is a tough time. This is
Oh,
we're seeing a lot of
yeah.
craziness right now that is very, very frightening. I mean, who would have thought that we would be seeing what's going on in LA? I mean,
Yes.
anti-Semitism rates are up. I mean,
The
there's so
anti-immigration.
much
It's more than
anti-immigration.
craziness. It's a
Yes.
mind. I don't use any curse words here. It's a mind. I don't know
People,
what.
but people are struggling with this. I mean,
Yes, absolutely.
people, are the depression rates are very, very, very high. They're very high for our kids. I mean, we are seeing depression rates for adolescents that we've never seen before.
Well, if I may
Okay.
say, this is what parents and adults can do, can help that. Stand up, be true. Don't let this sort of hate and venom continue. You've got to stand up and take some of the consequences. Otherwise, the rates of all that you're dealing with here, mental illness and loneliness and addiction and so on, are going to continue to rise because there is a very, very deep connection between these personal issues and the larger social issues.
You're right, and people are really, really feeling it.
They are,
Of
all
all
of
of
us.
all ages and stages in life. I
Agree.
mean, when I hear young people saying, people in their 20s and 30s and older, that there are no good men, that they've given up on love, that they've given up on the idea of a happily ever after. Um, it's really, it's so sad to be hearing all of this, where people are feeling more and more and more disconnected. I mentioned, my patient who I had been encouraging for years to go to the gym, and I told her this was going to be a wonderful, wonderful way to connect with people. And what she's come back and reported is that, people are plugged in. They're plugged into their devices so that there isn't even the opportunity to be able to have the potential to connect with someone. I mean, even to make a friend. So we need as a society, I think that we need to be talking about this. Think that we need to be examining, what is working and what is not working in our lives, and be willing to pivot,
And we
to
need
be
people
will.
like Edward R. Murrow, who we saw on the Good Night, Good
Good
Luck
luck.
production that
Yes.
was on the
With
other
George
day,
Clooney,
because we
yes.
don't have an equivalent at all in the media standing up like he did. And there's a handful, so we need to support that. There's very few adults in the room,
Well, what's going
and
on in the
so on.
media, what's going on in
Media,
media is a whole other thing.
well, and look at the
And I'm
lost,
so
right,
appreciative
right,
of Gary Null and
yeah,
the Progressive Radio Network, because we have the freedom on our shows to really
exactly,
express what it
exactly,
is that we feel, even though there may be differences of
exactly,
opinion.
exactly.
We are not being censored. And it's something, I mentioned to you with, ABC and CBS television. People are being fired because of what's been
Because the
happening because of
so-called
Trump.
adults are fearful
Well, yeah,
of repercussions
yes, yeah,
of a bully,
of a bully,
and
and,
so
and funding being cut.
and
So
young people see that.
yes, it's a very, very challenging time. But I do want to leave my listeners, with my two weekly, I hope, upbeat messages. And I think that this discussion is really important. Is the first thing is that we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to take the time to figure out, are we living our lives? Am I living my life in ways that are really in my best interest? And it's something to ask ourselves, I think, on a really regular basis. And if we're finding that there's certain areas in our life that are off, then we need to be willing, we need to step up and acknowledge and address and resolve and make whatever changes and pivot, as necessary. And of course, secondly, as you're saying, Jim, we all really need to be doing a much, 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 much better job in learning to try to get along with each other, despite our political differences and religious differences and spiritual differences and vaccine differences. I think that there needs to be a coming together. Otherwise, we're going to end up as a society, we're going to end up destroying ourselves. So these are things that I think that we need to be talking about. And more importantly, I think these are things that we actually need to be seriously putting into action. So I want to thank my listeners for listening every single week. I'll be back next Monday and every Monday from 3 to 4 p.m. And I want to thank my wonderful husband, Jim Bredos, always, always for your
Thank you.
engaging conversation and your perspective
Thank you.
on
Thanks. Thanks,
on
Beatty.
our subject matter. So goodbye, everybody. Have a very good rest of the day, and we'll be with you next week. Take care.